Good morning. My name is Sridhar Rajeswaran. I'm going to speak on the filmmaker Deepa Mehta. My presentation is slightly long. Apologies. This is by virtue of the fact that I'm not quite sure that the audience would be familiar with all the films which Deepa Mehta has possibly made. And that by virtue of which I personally feel that a little bit of storyline has to be shared with you. That accounts for the slight length. So pardon me. I have a PP with me. I will share it with you. Just give me a moment. I hope the PP is visible. I've entitled this talk, Scorched by Fire, Drowned by Water, No Heaven on a Cracked Earth, a look at Deepa Mehta's women. Now, the title is clearly suggestive of the fact that I've referred to 5 films of Deepa Mehta, which I consider absolutely important to understand her oeuvre. A look is definitely used in the way Edward Said actually uses it. I have a pictorial representation of the heroines because though this is cross-cultural and it could constitute cultural materialistic discourse in a manner of speaking, it is also feminist perspectives. So I've singled out the women who happen to be the protagonists. To briefly introduce Deepa Mehta, she was born in India in 1950, studied philosophy at Delhi University, migrated to Canada in 1873, married Canadian Paul Saltzman, has a daughter Devyani by him, now divorced from husband, lives in Toronto, Canada, with partner David Hamilton. These are some of the films: Sam and Me, Fire, Earth, Bollywood, Hollywood, The Republic of Love, Water, Heaven on Earth, What is Cooking, Stella, then Midnight's Children, based on Salman Rushdie's work. I didn't touch upon Midnight's Children by virtue of the fact that it is entirely on a different note. Having said this, I've looked at one film anyway in the context of India and partition and colonization, which is Earth 1947, and as it was written by Babsi Sidhwa from Pakistan, I felt that was a better option as per choice. This PP is also presented in such a way that it doesn't merely list out the points, but it is quite elaborate. This is to accommodate certain difference in pronunciation by virtue of the fact that I come from a different spatio-temporal reality, and sometimes I might be speaking fast and it may not be clear. And the third reason is also by virtue of the fact that this is something which is pre-recorded, so it is possible that there are some kind of voice lags or something to that effect. That is one of the reasons. And though this is a slightly longer presentation, as it is being recorded, I would be skipping a few things because those of you who want to revisit it can do at a later point in time. Earth, nation cartographed on the body of a woman. This is the story of Shanta. It's the story of a nation which is undivided colonial India, and it is again cartographed on the body of a woman named Shanta. So actually there are 2 stories, one of a nation and one of a woman. The woman is also a nation, as the nation is feminine in this particular context. The nation gets spliced into 2, India and Pakistan, thanks to hastily drawn colonial line, Ratcliffe. that splits a nation into two at the stroke of the midnight hour on the night of the 14th of August, 1947. The dawn of a new tryst to destiny on the 15th is red in color, a red rose, Nehru's freedom at midnight speech, reddened by blood, cut at night, conversation between Hari and Yusuf in the representation. The woman too, in a person, is spliced into two and is representative of both Madonna and the whore, or the Devi and the Devdasi. I've used these terms, Devi and the Devdasi, thanks to a path-breaking paper written by Professor Nilufar Barucha entitled Devi, Devdasi and Dayan, which is freely available on the net. What Barucha had done was introduced a third category, which is absent in the original version of Madonna and Or. Earth, the nation cartographed on the body of a woman, continued. Suddenly, it is a story of two nations, birthed in the backdrop of death, mayhem, arson, fire, and rape. It's a new world order broken into fragments by narrow domestic walls. I'm quoting Tagore because I found out that this is the Tagore Center, where the clear stream of reason, having lost its way, has his head no more held high, hands slit at the throat, reference to Hassan's death in the film, and where truth in a tongue is an infection. And so a holy man, Imam Din, swears and lies on the holy book to save a girl from rape. A crippled child is a bearing witness. Crippled is a deliberate use. Euphemistic phrases would dilute the impact of the reality, as it's a metaphor for the nation too, which got fragmented. This is no word by a cracking earth. So that is one of the reasons for the title in the context of Cracking Earth, which was also the original title for the book by Bapsi Sidhwa, Earth 1947 being a remake of Bapsi Sidhwa's work. The story begins in a neutral Parsi Zoroastrian house that's a trough for the colonial nation, i.e. undivided India. The household, though domestic, helps through domestic helps and through friends and relatives, is representative of all the subjects who indwell in this nation state. All segments of the society, its different strata are represented, as are all the religions, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Parsi, and Christian, including the representatives of the colonial masters. This is made through Mr. and Mrs. Rogers, who are present at the dinner table. A plate is broken, and a map bears witness to the impending fragmentation of the nation. Actually, the first scene, including the entitling display, more or less completes the story in a nutshell, and the rest of the film is detailing. The last scene, of course, is something which reminds one of Alberto Moravio's Two Women, where even Madonna cannot prevent a rape during war. Friends turn foes in the story, and the reasons for the same is also embedded in embittered love, a classic interreligious Hindu-Muslim love story, where the slighted lover initiates the rape of his beloved and the killing of his former friend, her lover. There is carnage everywhere, and all this in the presence of a child who sees the horror, the horror, the horror. It reminds one of Eliot's Wasteland and Conrad's Heart of Darkness. All the elements of filmmaking are gloriously present: sound, music, lighting, editing, camera work, and that includes framing, movement, and dynamic time warping. It's useful here to recollect Kurosawa, Ray, Eisenstein, Kuleshov, Hitchcock, and all of them. The mise-en-scenes are virtually sculpted. The songs and sheer poetry of Iqbal and Rula Naila, that word Sidhwa's text, are aptly captured in a work that is true to this sensibility too. There is a world of symbols which their own purports, and this is explored in a separate slide along with the other films. Now there's a slight difference between Sidhwa and Deepa. Partition diaspora, certain similarities and differences have to be noted. Bapsi Sidhwa was the bearing witness because she was 9 years old when she saw Lahore burning. Whereas in the context of Deepa Mehta, she's not a bearing witness, she's repossessing history. Similarly, to Sidhwa, it is memory. To Deepa Mehta, it is retold memory. To Sidhwa, it is re-memory. To Deepa Mehta, it's post-memory. To Sidhwa, it is actual and real landscapes of memory, whereas to somebody like Deepa Mehta is re-imaged landscape of memory. To Sidhwa, a word is worth 1,000 words. To Deepa Mehta, a picture is worth 1,000 words. To Sidhwa, words that freeze. To Deepa Mehta, it's the moving frame that actually stills. So these differences should be taken into account when you're looking at a film, a remake of a film, or when you're looking at a book and an adaptation of a text written in word to an imagistic representation. Now to go down to water. Water is the tragedy of being a widow. So earth is something which is primary. It is on earth. The other stories are, in a manner of speaking, made to rise from. It is from the earth. So the first film, which we always take into account, is with reference to the earth, and it has got other denotations and connotations, especially in the context of the protagonist, which we will look when we actually interpret the symbols after I finish off with the storylines. Water is the story of Kalyani, played by Risale and Shuya, and other widows, most of them brought in as child widows to indwell in a place called the ashram. The women in the ashram are the living dead, marked and ill-treated by the society. The person who manages the ashram is a victim herself, but due to the economics of it all, living under the largesse of patriarchy, is depicted as a person who has no scruples and pleases her patrons with a supply of widows for their carnal purposes. The beautiful Kalyani is one such victim who succumbs to the overwhelming endeavors of an incurable love showered on her by a Gandhian student, Narayan, played by John Abraham. And just have to shift this a little bit so that I can read it. The beautiful Kalyani is one such victim who succumbs to the overwhelming endearment and incurable love showered on her by a Gandhian student, Narayan, and she accedes to his request, much to the chagrin of Manorama, the one who runs the ashram. She locks Kalyani in a room and cuts out her hair, which is, of course, a symbol of sexuality right from the times of Medusa. But that does not deter the mutual love and sensitive affection between Narayan and Kalyani. All names have a symbolic meaning adduced to them. Manorama is only frightened of Shakuntala, the one who manages the ashram, and it is easily deducible that she too was exploited when young. There is a scripture scholar called Sadananda, well versed with Manusmriti and the loss of the land, who actually is the only source of solace for Shakuntala and the other women in the ashram. This role is played by a brilliant character called Kulbhushan Karbanta, who features prominently in earth, fire, water, as well as Bollywood, Hollywood, and artistically is a masterpiece in characterization as he serves an important purpose as a counterpoint maybe to the Gandhian idea on truth and God as it will be shown, and further he is the string through which all four films are beaded together. Meanwhile, the nefarious pandering to the male lust is handled through Gulabi, who belongs to a third sex, and Chuya is carted off to quench the lust of pedophile Seth Dwarakanath, who has frequently abused Kalyani too. Seth Dwarakanath spouts karma and moksha and says his work is actually a work which liberates the fallen. The fallen here refers to the widows. Seth Dwarakanath is Narayan's father, and when Kalyani decides to meet Narayan and leaves the ashram, knowing there is no return to the place, she finds out the relationship of father and son and drowns herself. Narayan, who is crestfallen, is approached by Shakuntala to save the young raped Chuya, and the train carrying Gandhi, which had arrived while leaving, takes Chuya too, as Shakuntala manages to hand over the young widow to Narayan. Remember, in this context, there is the train which brings in the mutilated bodies in Earth 1947 too. Gandhi had arrived to talk about truth as God, and it is something that has been violated. This is a loaded scene and has ramifications in the context of understanding Gandhian principles. Water, these are few of the unforgettable, hurting images, and they do freeze. That is what I meant as regards the ability of the cinematographer to speak in multiple languages, of images, of music, of light, of shadows, and dialogue. There's so many different things. And she also time warps by actually moving frames in variable speeds. Fire is nothing but a patriarchal fear of agency. The opening scene of Fire needs to be noted, along with the opening shots of Earth 1947, that draws a definite line to indicate partition, as well as there is a montage of images that depict impending violence and mayhem. It needs to be equally read in the backdrop of the opening scene of Water for its color code and other symbols. Fire begins in a mustard field where Mother tells Radha about a person who wants to see the ocean. Of course, the intimations of travel, which is inclusive of a travel from present to the future, as also leaving the past behind, is informed as foregrounding. And this is a point which one can explore also in the context of post-colonial diasporic readings. Radha is married to Ashok. Here, the Imam of Earth 1947 and the religious figure becomes the husband. The role is played again by Kulbhushan Karbanda. And Sita is married to Jatin, both brothers. Jatin was in a physical relationship with a Chinese girlfriend, Julie, and this continues after his marriage to Sita too. It is in this film, the Chinese link is actually brought in, and this is of interest also in the context of looking at the diasporic filmmaker. Ashok, for his part, following his guru, Swamiji's instruction that sex is only for procreation, and finding his wife infertile, practices celibacy. Hats off to him if he wanted to do it for different reason, but he's enamored of the touch of sensuality, and he tries to constantly pour, but stops at that particular point in time. And this has a negative impact on his wife. Of course, it leaves her disenchanted with the physical aspect of his particular touch. She's tormented by a guilt of being infertile, aggrandized and frustrated by Ashok's aborted physical advances. The brothers, for their turn, they run a video shop where there are erotic videos being given up for rent. And this is a telling thing which needs to be brought in the context of sexuality and masculine understanding of sexuality, as well as the food stall and the paltry income too goes to the upkeep of the Swamiji's hydrocell. And this is in tongue in cheek, because whatever money they make, the husband takes it away and goes and gives it to the Swamiji. And it's an absolute indictment of the land where we have so many gurus coming in. And this also features prominently in Hollywood, Bollywood, where the opening scene of levitation actually results in the death of the beloved of the protagonist. There are two other characters in the household, Biji, who is an invalid and who needs constant care, and Mundu, a frustrated and repressed servant of a long time, who secretly fantasizes vicariously about Radha and self-titillates himself in the presence of Biji, the invalid mother-in-law, when the serial Ramayana is happening on the Doordarshan channel. This could be one of the reasons why there was some kind of a ban on Fire, other than the lesbian undertones in the film. Radha and Sita fall in love, and this physical proximity is noticed by Biji, who rings a bell literally, and Mundu, who ultimately, when caught in the act of titillating himself in front of Biji by Radha, tells on a relationship with Sita. The servant is forgiven, and Radha burns. And being spurned, Ashok does nothing to serve her. And this is what we call the Agni Pariksha. Radha gets her ocean journey as she goes to meet Sita, who is waiting for her in the temple to arrive. If this be the three films and the way it has been depicted, where there is absolutely no autonomy, because in each one of them, in the first one, a cracked earth brings in the issue of rape. In the second one, you have drowning by water. And in the third one, you have being scorched by fire. Heaven on earth, which is also part of the title, has the title here, the subtitle, it's no place for a wife and daughter-in-law. This is a usual trope in many places, the mother-in-law problem of harassment. Somewhere in the 1970s, there was this extraordinary bright burning, and 80% of it was written off as some kind of gas stove burst or stove burst. And this was a tool which was used by patriarchy to virtually do away with women who did not bring in proper dowry. This is an open secret in the sense like nobody talks about it, though many of us who have been born around slightly earlier and we were older enough can possibly comprehend. Heaven on earth, you have a vivacious, exuberant young bride, Chand, played by Preeti Zinta, who gets married into a traditional and horrible family living in a ghetto. This becomes important because the depiction in Canadian space is one of the highbrow, which is the home house, and the other one is the ghetto. So she has taken both these things into consideration. And reeling from financial strain is what the family she's married to is all about. Only to suffer many a travesty and is victimized and violence plotted and pieced on her body. She meets her husband, Rocky, for the first time on arrival at Pearson Airport, Canada. Chand is hopeful despite the status accorded to her, which was nothing akin to her expectations. Her marked face makes her friend, Rosa, a Jamaican from her workplace, give her a route, and she has a spectral double, and she continues living there until the reality of her fantastic, surreal life discloses itself, and she decides to return to India, move away from her husband and a family of useless tormentors, infected with stereotypes of Maji, Papaji, and a galaxy of others. Now, Pretty Woman and Bollywood, justifying the entitling, I've given you pictures from both these films. And Bollywood, Hollywood is real life and real life collapsing. I distinctly remember two articles. One is Baudrillard in the context and double order simulacra. And the second one here is hyperreal spaces. This could possibly prove useful. There's a mansion called Home House inhabited by the protagonist, a rich geek, Rahul Seth, who lives with his mother, Mammiji, Grandmaji, and sister, and younger brother, Govind. They also have a housekeeper stroke cook. Her name is Lucy, and a chauffeur who also dances as a drag queen. The mother is melodramatic. The brother who is in school has a crush on a girl, but there's also a boy villain who is a bully, who douses his hopes. Lucy is in love with Rocky and entices him with songs from Avara without knowing it's not a love song. So the entire quotient, the code of a Bollywood mirch masala is already available in this film. Rahul is in love with Kimberly, a pop star, actually his fiancée, but she dies in a freak levitation accident, a pot shot again at Yogi charlatans, and does a Devdas, and life suddenly turns Sunni, hopeless. There's a background song substantiating this. The mother wants him to marry a proper Indian girl, which he refuses initially. But as his sister Twinkie is pregnant with her boyfriend Bobby's child, he accedes. And there is this usual parading of grooms seeing girls. But here there is something else. He gets a cross-section of women who come down, some of them self-affrighting and very autonomous. And they do point out the idiosyncrasies and inconsistencies in the male protagonist. He actually meets a Pablo Neruda love sonnet aficionado in a bar, and assuming she's Spanish, wants her to play the role of his beloved. Her name is Sue, and she's an escort. Here is where the story of Pretty Woman comes in actually, but Sue is only an escort, of course, a palliative to the Indian psyche. Sue turns out to be Sunita Singh, who is equally comfortable with Rahul's people. In fact, becomes go with the young boy's crush, pleases Mamiji and Grandmaji, and slowly, even as she becomes the dear one of the family, Rahul too starts looking at her differently. All is hunky-dory, but the celluloid world breaks when during the bachelor's party for Bobby, the sister's groom, a drunk refused by Sue sexual favors, maligns her and calls her a streetwalker who had slept with him. The traditional patriarchal heart of Rahul breaks because she lied to him, and Sue is no more his beloved, but a girl who is not inviolate and also a lover of other people. And she's a liar, of course. Sue's father is a typical Bollywood fan living real life. This is the role played again by Kulbhushan Kharbanda, who is the string beating all these movies together. He finds a WWF wrestler who wears some size 21 shoes as a suitor for Sue. Sue calls him a brainless dinosaur. Sue's mother is the ideal woman, caught between a Batinda Gilli Danda spokesman and a well-read, sensitive and sensuous daughter who enters her house through windows and who is quite able in her own right of asserting herself with a patriarchal filmy father. Rocky Rukini and Sue have a secret pact, and it is Rocky, the drag queen, who actually turns around and plays Cupid and says, Sue, ma'am, is special. You have the Shakespearean spouting colonial influence Grandmaji, who too put sense into Rahul's head, and Sue Cinderella's dreams are fructified. And the movie progresses in such a way, you have the usual things of the ghosts of Hamlet in the context of Kimberly and Dadaji from Heavens Above. Now, a critical look, having talked about all the 5 films, the Elements trilogy, as it is called, Earth, Fire, and Water in themselves, have only partial validity and need at least 2 other important films in Mehta's oeuvre for completion: Bollywood, Hollywood, and Heaven on Earth. Reading the Elements trilogy against the backdrop of these 2 other films would be beneficial, as it would also reveal outsider-insider positions. Talk about the third space, the stereoscopic as well as the periscopic visions of meta cinema, which are central to diasporic discourse on representation. The particular form in the genre of filmmaking she has chosen for her narration interlocks with memory, rememory, post-memory, and she may be said to be looking at bearing witness testimonies, and which she seeks to unconceal through symbols and streams imaged in diverse ways drawn from the nation as well as the nation state. Having said this, it's quite obvious Hollywood, Bollywood, and Heaven on Earth to have their forebears from different contexts, and locating them in the context of the particular inspirations and sources for those inspirations, the ground, the terrains that enunciated them would also be useful. For instance, Bollywood, Hollywood is a take on Pretty Woman, which has a different location, and there is a significant change in the characterization of the lead protagonist, Vivian Ward, played by Julia Roberts, who is a streetwalker, as opposed to Sue Sunita, played by Lisa Ray, who is only an escort. Both these tales fall in the genre of fairy tale Cinderella stories, and the shift in depiction may be due to the context of reception. An Indian diasporic audience imbued with certain patriarchal sensibilities that may perhaps be better tuned to a protagonist who is not a streetwalker. At least as far as the male protagonist, a stereotypical male Rahul Seth, played by Rahul Khanna, is concerned, such a reading seems to have some credibility. The conversation between the grandmother and Rahul Seth, as regards his worst fears coming true, is a quintessential moment in the film that exposes mindsets. Chand of Heaven on Earth is part of the oppressed lot exploited by patriarchy, so much like the other women protagonists of Earth, Fire, and Water, who all stand victimized as objectified symbols of voiceless truth. Further, Such comparative readings, which are inclusive of the Canadian international spaces, may be more informative and, of course, make the quest definitely more gratifying. It is in general axiomatic that in trying to locate the discourse of any writer or filmmaker, is necessary to look at the entire body of work, or at least a substantial body of work, its inspirations and its forebears, as it offers a comprehensive view and insight into the fictions and frontiers that govern the work. I have here broken down, I'm not going to elaborate on this because this is a recording, it is available to you. I have broken down all the symbols which are possible, the principal ones at least, and you know, I have the movie, I've given the title, The Iconic Feminine. I've listed it as the different movies. Then I have put in the character of the child. The child is somebody important for the nation. Then I have also talked about the patriarchal masculine. Then I have given the space for the third sex. The next slide happens to be as regards the symbols in the context of location, private space, public space, and national space, because this is going beyond Habermas in a manner of speaking if you're really looking at it, because the sum total of a nation is larger than the sum total of all its parts. And so we'll have to understand what is private space, what is public space. In the context of Deepa Mehta, we are talking diasporic spaces too. So I've worked this out and listed it out. You can have a look. I've also broken down the color. What are the symbols for love? What are the symbols for art? How is the nation represented? What are the different strains and streams? Now let us decode the symbols. This is coming down to the last part of my presentation. Tracing the progress of the filmmaker's path, it is seen that Mehta essays two different streams. The one that seeks to root a film in those mysteries of the heart, and in attempting this, seeks out a muse, object of love and desire, and recalls her in through a series of iconic feminine images. The term iconic feminine images are arrived at through the very names that are all part of India's religious iconography, and by extension, cultural India, as are their masculine counters that are the names of the filmmakers' male protagonists. The gods, those seem to, more often than not, in their avatar as male protagonists, not live up to their benevolent stature or what they symbolize. These iconic feminine images as symbols also represent in their gendered status the world of nation and history. The iconic feminine is at once a reverential object, but the filmmaker showcases that in practice they are not. Here recollect Professor Nilufer Barucha's article, which I quoted earlier, Devis, Dhyans, and Devadasis. Or remember, at least the context, in this context, Madonna and whore. The images are composite and basically contain their selves, the other of their selves, their others, their foils, their doubles, their counters, including spectral doubles. All our protagonists feed into each other, either as images of what she should be as regards the ideal status accorded to her, or what she is not, thanks to patriarchal practices of oppression and exploitation. The iconic images also suffer the traversities of the politics of imperialist ideologies, suffer the concomitant strategies of resistance, as well as suffer due to the emergence of policies of modern nation states. The second complex of images which register the progress of the nation in the filmmaker's consciousness comprises historical spaces, figures, events, structures that underpin the political, social, economic identity of the nation and its people. Please remember, the nation is feminine. It is to this group belong people like Gandhi, Nehru, Jinnah, and structures like the Taj Mahal, scriptures that code life and are part of the national political. It is to this group belongs the great colonial mansions, ashrams and ghettos, and park, dhabas, statues, prisons, temples, and the like. In short, it is that which constitutes private and public spaces of the nation and the nation state. Being an artist with an art that bears witness and monitors history, there are objects which are concrete and material others of abstract spiritual ideas, love, light, and truth, if abstract in their non-material sense, have equivalence in the texts of Shakespeare, Neruda, the Ramayana, and the scriptures, which are cited here as examples. There are entire arrays of objects and equipments which have a symbolic value adduced to them, and these are scattered throughout the films: black umbrella, red rose, maps, color pencils, plates that break to signify a nation being broken, kites that are cut, signifying how a person is going to be slit at the throat, doll that is disfigured. Doll is definitely a veritable symbol of art. Sweets, flowers, an entire array of objects that resonate with the purpose. The word resonate here is used as a loaded term. By resonance, I mean the power of the object displayed to reach out beyond its formal boundaries to a larger world. Of course, referring here to Resonance and Wonder, the path-breaking article. Love, lie, and a kind of woman-hating in spite of Gandhi, his principles and his ideological stand seem to be the string that binds, strains, and strings together. For after all, whatever be the source of gendering, Gandhi was one person who stood against all such practices, and the saddest part is the prevalence of those despite himself then and India after him. To conclude, in truth, the web of lies spun around women. In these three films located in the Indian space, too many silences punctuate a cinematic discourse. The her here refers to Deepa Mehta. Needless to reiterate that a thematic concerns the world of symbols she delves into, the icons she uses to make her ever work, the terrain and location that juts them, are all whirled into each other with a lot of unsaid behind what presences itself as a set, making it hard to glimpse, let alone disinter the complexity at its multivalent core. Earth 1947 is central to Deepa Mehta's work, and it is on Earth that a protagonist, love-driven, voiceless truth gets scorched by fire, doused by petrol, and consumed by a cracking earth. There's also a tangential reference to the birth and release of Sita, born of earth and to earth returned, consumed by a cracking earth. The reference here is to the original story of Sita as told in the Ramayana. The earth parts to take Sita back in her womb, and thus Mehta Sita refers to the cycle of birth and death. Sita is thus the iconic feminine standing for the circle of a woman's life. Shanta, Deepa Mehta's protagonist in Earth 1947, contrary to what her name and she as a character stand for, that is, i.e., peace that surpasseth understanding, is actually a subject and an object of violence which is cartographed on her body. This indicts the earth, which she actually is too. Peace is the need for Prithvi, and it gets violated by a truth-infected tongue in the instance of Lenny, and lacks agency in Imam Din, precisely because he is a pious and decent man. Hence, by deflection, Shanta and Sita are both of the earth, and the earth per se, with sufferance being the badge of their tribe, the cracked terra firma, their other. Sita is, of course, also Deepa Mehta's protagonist in Fire, and she arrives in a manifestation of as Kalyani, name associated with the goddess in water, and as peace, Shanta on earth, which makes us conclude that the women are composite, but the pity is that they indwell in a new land that is now a place perfect only for the burial not of the dead, but the living and the living dead. If one were to take a closer look at the other women characters of a story, explore the verisimilitude in meanings which their name signified, they too would be linked to the main protagonists. In this film, she is paired with Narayan, suffers unrequited love, resists morally expediency, though desperate, as she knows the truth that cannot be voiced. Her name means auspicious, an aspect of goddess Lakshmi. But unfortunately and ironically, Deepa Mehta's Kalyani is inauspicious, a widow, condemned by societal norms, and yet conveniently exploited by a sinister moral code, scriptural codes sanctified physically, sexually. So menacing is the apathy and poverty in itself designed for male convenience that there are no alternatives offered to the widows who have to stay in the ashram. This ashram in which they live, exist as nothing common to what an ashram is supposed to be or what Gandhi's understanding of the same was. As for our fire, which is untranslatable because the original is called Agni, and the sacred is rendered profane by patriarchy in vain, torching Radha for being in love and moving away from an impotent husband. There are also undertones to his practice of celibacy, as this was part of the practice advocated by none the less than Gandhi, which makes us wonder, is it a pot shot on him too? All the characters in this film seem to be all engaged in hiding truth and living lies in the steaming cauldron of tepid life, in contrast to the tasty sweets made by Radha and Sweeta. Mehta's films set outside India are also intrinsically linked to the Indian space. Bollywood as home as his colonial mansion, the great house that is already there as a trope in the context of Earth 1947. Home is the primordial sound, is the house in Hollywood, Bollywood, and is linked to Prithvi, Earth, as an inextricable, as an irreducible construct, and hence the direct link between Earth 1947 and the space of the diaspora in Canada that has suffered the effects of partition. The irony is, the spaces within India proved to be almost terminal in all three instances, and in dramatic terms, pathetic and or tragic, as opposed to peripetia resolving rather favorably in the stories emanating from the outsider space. The reference here is to Sue, who had friends in Rocky and Rukini, and the inimitable Shakespeare spouting, also lie-ignoring Grandmaji, who is the other of Lenny's truth-infected tongue, and is in contrast to the ineffectual appreciator of truth, Bunty, and the melodramatic Mummiji. The ghost of Hamlet, the father as well as the girlfriend, lost to levitation, who too is a living ghost, or of course Shakespeare too, by extension, Shakespeare is the spectral secret sharer. Chand of heaven on earth, who for a support at the tough Jamaican Rosa gives voice to a lie, are magic by extension, a counter to patriarchal spouting of convenient philosophies, scriptures and quotes, characters from Mehta's other film. Heaven on earth depicts the other of the great house. It is the great colonial ghetto. As regards heaven on earth, the connections are quite obvious. So is the Indies and Komagata Maru episode, when the white only policy of Canada made the abstract heaven a living hell, pun intended. That is why the title, Heaven on Earth. In this film, though, the kind of ghetto Chand was pushed into did not need the outside world. A husband and his family were quite qualified enough to make our existence a real hell, and sufficient to showcase the insidiousness, the chauvinism of patriarchy that assaults physically. In Heaven on Earth, loveliness, Chand's foil, Maji and Aman, the vicious and the frustrated, Papaji, ineffectual, Baldev, the unemployed parasite, and Raki Chand's repressed apology of an husband. It continues on and on, on and on. The story also has its other sources, which I had listed out here. Well, there is no space whatsoever for Radha and Sita, Shanta, or Kalyani in the world they represent of Agni, Aap, Prithvi, coded by Manu. Having said this, consistent with all the films set outside of the Indian space, and specifically in the Canadian, the resolutions are not terminal. There is a third space for Rocky as Rukini, the drag queen, though limited the space, delimited by his agency. There exists also an alternative space, a nest for the male to escape, and the bar where to some extent Sue can live her life as the pretty woman. The point is, in the nation space of India, which is imaged as a woman, Shanta, Kalyani, Sita, Radha are all left dead, deadened, or are part of the living dead under the watchful eyes of Gandhi and the patriarchal gaze. Interestingly, though, it is Kulbhushan Garbanda who plays the role and the string. Kalyani, Shanta, Radha, Sita, Sue, and Chand are all part of the nation, and on their bodies is mapped the story of women and the privileged nation. 3 children, one crippled, one married to a dwarf, one widowed and raped, and then a sterile world with no children, and suggestions of alternative sexuality for survival. These are loaded issues which have in their core love as ever present in a truth that is voiceless for female protagonists. Having said this, one sees that the Canadian space spells different possibilities. On that note, thank you.